Now, let's go to the next topic then, which is what we call color contrast and or color constancy, right? So again, you may wonder like why we care about all this stuff, right? And one of the reasons we harp on this stuff about like how your visual system is based on contrast, right? So we talked about this a lot with just light. We talked about how, you've got all this lateral inhibition stuff and you have these cells that prefer, spots of light surrounded by dark, and then later on like bars of light surrounded by dark, or vice versa. And we talked a lot about how your visual system is based on contrast and the things that lets you do, right? Because, we had I think there was a whole question on the exam about like why lateral inhibition is important, why it's important to kind of have your visual system based on contrast, right? And, we said there's kind of two reasons that are kind of interlinked that those things matter. One of which is that like it enhances your perception of edges, right? And edges are usually the things that define the boundaries of real objects. And the other thing a system that kind of prefers contrast does is it makes your system not respond too differently when you have changes in the overall light levels, right? Because if your system were not based on, contrast, right? Like if I raise the lights in the room versus lower them, there may be, who knows, like 10 times as many photons entering your eyeballs when the lights are all the way up versus when they're all the way down, right? But you do not perceive like a 10x change in the intensity of your visual experience, right? Because your system is kind of designed to ignore kind of overall changes in brightness and, and just kind of focus on the contrasts regardless of how well lit the scene is, right? And the reason it's important to talk about this stuff for color also, right, by having these systems that are based on color contrast, red versus green and blue versus yellow, is because the same thing kind of has to be true for color as well, right? So what we'll see is like, because we have our color processing is based on contrast, just like our perception of brightness, we get the same kinds of effects that we do with brightness, only the color versions of them, right? So if you guys remember, we kind of showed simultaneous contrast illusions where like we had two gray squares surrounded by either like darker gray or lighter gray, and they looked like they were different shades of gray, depending on what the surround was. We get the same kind of center surround effect here, right? Where, you may not believe me, but it's actually true that this and this circle are exactly the same color. Sorry about the kind of pukey colors, but this is just the figure that I found first. But, the dots are basically, are in fact identically the same color, right, on the screen, but they look to you to be different colors because their surrounds are different, right? So because your color system, in addition to your brightness system, is based on contrast, you get these same kinds of color contrast effects that you get, for simultaneous contrast just with brightness, right? Okay, so now because that's true, right, we can infer that probably some of the other things that are true about like your system being based on brightness from just, or based on contrast, just from the brightness stuff is also true, right? So your system is pretty robust, or it doesn't really matter how well lit the scene is for you to be able to perceive things. And similarly, your color processing is actually pretty well able to handle overall changes in the color balance of the light hitting the whole scene as well, right? So this kind of leads to some weird effects, such as this. So like these, if you look at these two kind of like button shapes, whatever they are, these kind of frisbee shapes, and you look at the spot with the dot on it in both of these shapes, it's actually true that both of these are the exact same color, right? So this one looks kind of greenish, this one looks kind of yellowish, hopefully to your eyes. And you may think that, that's because this is green and that is kind of yellowish orange, but in fact these are, again, the same exact patch or shade of color. And the reason they look different colors to you, right, is because overall, this disc here, right, kind of has an overall average redder shade, and this kind of has an overall average, like, kind of greener or bluer shade, right? And what that means is, right, like, if your system is based on contrast, essentially this, this is kind of I think these are actually kind of like basically neutral gray in terms of their actual shade. Let me see if I can